All right, how you guys doing today? Um, Starting a little bit late today. I'm going to add some of the items in the description later on. What we're going to do today is talk about old paint in old homes. And I think we're going to do, once again, is I'm just going to get down to the nitty gritty right off the bat, get the basics here right now. I'll go right up front and do it. And then for people who want to hang out a little bit longer, we've got some good history and health facts on this type of old paint. And also, the last section, we'll talk about testing of this type of paint, examples, and we're even going to do a case study. So if you want to hang out for the whole thing, you can, but let's get right. So, what do you need to know when you're renting a home or buying a home? You really need to know a lot, especially if you are a female in childbearing age, or you'll have children, especially children under the age of 6. Um, you find this old paint in homes, old homes, usually pre 1978. Find it in soil, especially like around the old homes where they used to scrape the paint and they didn't use drop cloths. Okay, you find it in dust, which is generated from friction. We're going to talk about that. You find it in water because the solder and our pipes leach some of it out. You find it at work. People that used to work on cars and do brakes. Okay, um, food, in hobbies, folk remedies, smelters, and a lot of different toys. And so, moving right along, we're going to talk about, it's defined as a varnish, shellac, or other coatings that contain more than 1.0 micrograms per centimeter squared. And I don't know what happened here. Um, Anyways, sorry about that. Apparently, my Galaxy has been updated. I'm using my cell phone, just so you know. I'm working on putting a little studio together, so I'm basically shooting a cell phone into my screen, my computer, and talking to the cell phone. So these will get much better as I do these. As far as we were talking about the 1 micrograms per centimeter squared, we're going to skip all the mathematical stuff. Okay, we're just going to say, there's this material in this paint that causes damage and harm to humans. Okay, you're probably wondering why I'm not saying the word with the L, because if I do that, my video doesn't get advertisement. They apparently YouTube doesn't like that word. So, but you can see it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm try not to going to say any words that may trigger me to lose my ads. So areas that have peeling, chipping, caulking, exposed soil. We're going to get into that. Things that are mouthable, chewable. Like they used to make these beds, and they used to have this old paint on them, and the babies would chew it. I mean, they put their mouth on it, and so back then in those days they didn't know. And then the pets, walk around the house in the soil around the house. They bring it in. Kids like to play in the soil. And of course, when people scraped the homes and painted back then, they didn't have vinyl and aluminum. And by the way, homes today that have aluminum and vinyl and they're old, that's a problem because every time there's thunder or there's vibrations in the home, you can easily cause paint to be disturbed and fall behind that siding and end up around the perimeter of the home. And so that's why you want to have ground cover. And we're going to show you a couple slides. By the way, there are test kits that you can buy. These test kits, you can get them at Home Depot, or you can get them right online. I will provide you a couple links if you want to save some money. You can just go right to these links and get them from there and just have delivered. Today, I guess people don't go to stores as much anymore, so this is a good time, to do stuff at home on your computer. So I will give you the links for that. Um, the Now, when I was talking about the peeling, you can see here where this old home, they're painting it and they're scraping it, and this ends up in the dirt. Okay, And what happens is it stays here forever. This stuff's not going to go away. And so when you walk on it, you pick it up, you know, on your shoes, and you bring it in your carpets in your car and your carpets at home, you know, and so usually what I tell people to do is when they have this condition, I usually tell people to scrape up 2 inches, and that's, you know, where I come from, 2 inches is what they tell you, but you know, you can maybe go less. And then you want to cover it. You can cover it with grass. You can cover it with concrete. I do a lot of testing, and I've got videos on YouTube that tell you to put mulch down. And so all these types of coverings are good and work. Basements. Now, this is another area, you know, if you're going to rent a house, you know, always go look for this stuff, especially if you have children and females in childbearing age. You could get poisoned and poison, you know, future babies, and it stores in your bone. And so you want to make sure that these places are clean. The basement's always one place you want to look at, because now these basement terracotta tiles may not have it, but here you could see, you know, there's a water problem. And when basements, especially old homes, you could tell this terracotta tile is probably 1930s. You know the drain tiles are plugged up. If you rent a house and there's trees next to the home, well, it's not rocket science. Your basement's going to have moisture, and plus then you're going to have mold, right? And so, you know, you're going to have both of these problems. So always look outside. You're renting a house, and a lot of times they paint the walls. You know, they don't tell you need a dehumidifier, but if you're renting an old home with an old basement like this, you're going to have to buy a dehumidifier and run it, and it's going to add another $20 to your electric bill. So very important to look at the basement before you buy and rent. Besides, if you have to waterproof, damp-proof, you know, it costs money. Sometimes it's easy, you know, from gutters overflowing, or, you know, maybe you need to snake out the drain tile, or maybe there's an issue with storm lines. This stuff for sure, a lot of the paint on the old stacks and old conduits can be lead. You can see how that's all peeling and failing. Okay, and that ends up going on the basement floor, and then you carry it up through the house, and you could have new carpets, and within weeks contaminate your carpets. There's a home here where they painted the floors. Now we know, post 1978, that hey Nick, how you doing? Hey, what's up? Oh, thank you very much, Nick. I'm gonna try to get better at these shows when I get my my little green screen room together. So thanks for coming on. Now, when you look at this basement floor, you can see this paint's okay, but look at this green paint. You know that green paint's from 1950, okay? And most of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s paints, you know, the semi-gloss especially, were very great paints. I mean, they were ductile because they had metal in them. And so you know that this is that the bad paint, the old bad paint, you know. I'm not going to say that word. I'm going to try not to say that word this whole time, because it may get me, I might lose my commercials because of that. So here's the real problem with these old basements you're looking at. Back then, they didn't use plastic barriers underneath, so you get what's called damp rise. And hydrostatic pressure, especially if you've got trees around the house, it wants to push moisture up, you know, not only in the walls like you saw in the other photo, but up through the floor. It's called damp rise, hydrostatic pressure, and it causes the paint to fail. So here's what you do. You know, let's say you bought the house. Well, they have these great rubber mats. Just put the rubber mats down and walk over those. And then every couple of years, paint it, okay? This is a floor, and here, later on, for the people that hang out, you know, or you want to watch it later, the last part of the show, I'm going to talk about testing for this stuff and how to test. And you could actually test yourself, you know, if you wanted to. Let's say you're buying a home or renting a home, or, you know, you're going to visit and you're filling out an application. You could grab a chip here with a piece of tape, just put the piece of tape, pull up the tape, and then do like these lead checks you could buy. Matter of fact, like I said earlier, I'll provide a link down below, and you could hit that link. And if you're going to be looking at homes, carry one of those around, or you can. I believe some of the stores sell different types of these kits that you could buy to let you know if they're positive, you know, for high level old paint. So this is just me doing a test. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Obviously, the most susceptible kids are children under age of 6. And here you see a door, and this door's got friction. And the problem with these doors is they open and close, they open and close. And you can see there's the hinges here. And what's down there? Little paint chips. And that's newer carpet, but you can see those little paint chips. And then here, we know what that is. I just did a video on that stuff. You know, that material, and you can see all the dust here and how contaminated that is and how dirty that is. And so you know, if you're going into a home and you're going to rent it or you're going to buy it, then you need to look and see how dusty it is. Because if it's full of dust, you don't even know what's in that dust. Now we're talking about one type of prop. We're talking about old paint in the dust, but you could have other things like asbestos and chemicals and who knows what. And so I would say anybody or everybody should buy at least a good vacuum cleaner. I would say the vacuum cleaner should have the word HEPA, 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 high efficient particle air. And then you want to always keep your house clean. You want to always clean your hands. You know, hygiene is really important. So friction of surfaces you want to look at. Now, this is probably the worst, number one problem in American homes are these old windows. Now, that's a storm window, which is newer, but that's not the problem. It's this old sash window. And as the window goes up and down, it creates this problem here, which is friction and dust. And like when I test these, they fail. There's no way in a million years that this would pass. And then it gets onto the sill, which has just been painted. But if you open a window and the dust falls on, a little kid puts his hands on that, and it gets on in his mouth. So you don't have to, kids don't have to actually eat paint chips, get paint chips to get poisoned, and so you want to definitely take care of that. Hey Nick, thank you. Yes, I missed that question, but I'll answer it later on when I get a chance to read it. So I will answer it, and we'll comment on that. Okay, here we go. They put the mulch down. They scraped. There's the window. There's the caulking and glazing and painting. So it's. I hate to say this. If you got a house with old windows, especially the old wood windows, and you're worried about old paint being a problem, especially when you rent to, let's say, government type, Section 8s and things like that, they're going to check and they're going to require clearance testing on these, okay? They're going to require you to provide a clean place that's dust-free, paint peeling free, and paint deteriorated free. So it's very difficult to deal with old windows. I hate to say it, but you probably have to replace the windows, okay? All these windows, like right there, man, that is so high in levels that, it would make anybody, and people don't know it. And, it's not that the kid's going to eat that. The dust is going to get on this. They're going to put their hands on this. They're going to grab it, or the dog's going to jump up looking for somebody to come home, and he's going to have it on his feet, and before you know it, it's in the bed because the dog sleeps with you, or the dog's on the couch. So cloth is another problem. Old carpets is a big problem. You buy a house, okay, you're renting a house, and they got old carpets. You have no clue who lived in that house. You have no clue what that person did. For all you know, the homeowner or the past tenant or owner repaired brakes, and the brakes have all that bad stuff in it, that asbestos and things like that. So, and he's been a rehabber, and he's coming home with paint dust, old paint dust all over him. Who knows what's in those carpets? So I would say today, not only that, today the homes are so much tighter, and the problem with carpets is that you get the dust mites that like to live in them, and so then you want to clean the carpets. But the real issue is these homes are tighter, and as they get older, they tend to leak more. And when they tend to leak more, because we talked earlier about hydrostatic pressure, they didn't use vapor barriers on their slabs. The trees are getting close, and the roots are clogging up the outside storm lines and drain tile. And sometimes they they make your sewers back up. Nobody wants that. And so the moisture levels in our homes are increasing, and then we put insulation in, or we're making our houses tighter and tighter and tighter. So the buffer capacity for moisture holding capabilities is significantly diminished. And so the levels of humidity go up, and dust mites after 50% humidity, actually at 40% humidity, they will live. They love it. And it's their fecal pellets that are the problems. I think they can drop out 50 pounds or 50 times their weight in fecal pellets per day, and maybe a little bit less than that, but it's a lot. And that becomes airborne, and we got a big asthma problem, right? So carpets are bad. you walk in a vacant building because it's a great deal. You know, you're walking through this stuff, man. Now you don't know what you're getting yourself into here. So I'd even have a respirator, you know, in your car for when you need it. And you know what? Let's just, for example, you're in California, right? And you're visiting your friends, and you got to rent a car, and you ran into one of them smoke clouds they just had. You know, those California fires. Man, if you didn't have a respirator or at least a dust mask or some type of filter on your mask, you got whacked. And that stuff was bad. I mean, that stuff was actually radioactive. And so I would say make sure you carry, you know, if you don't have a half face respirator, at least have a dust mask in your car. Okay. It's not a bad idea. I can't keep one in my computer bag if I need it, especially like if I go into an attic. The minute I open the attic hatch, you're taking that whiff of that first initial hit. It's bad stuff. So I'll provide, you know what, I'll provide a link below too for those, but you can get those pretty much anywhere. Furniture, you know, you go to garage sales and you buy this stuff, you know, and every time you open and close this thing, you know, you cause friction, and especially these desks. You know, those desks are from the 40s. And you know that was old paint with problems. Look, that girl's mad. Now, let's get into the you want to rent a house, okay? You are going to rent a house, and you're house shopping, and you're not gonna fix the landlord's house. So I don't think you should not look at how big the kitchen is, and you should not look at what kind of curtains are, or if there's granite countertops. You know, you need to look at other things. And I think the number one thing I would be looking at, especially if I'm, you know, renting a home and I have to go in an older neighborhood because, you know, I have a budget, I'm going to look at any friction surface. I'm going to look at where my kids can be poisoned. I'm going to look at where I can, or my pets can be poisoned. So look at the porches. These old wood porches, they're all that old paint. There's not this paint that you're looking at, the 4 layers underneath it. And you know what? When they peel, people like say, "Oh, it's not that paint." Well, of course it's not. They haven't made that paint since 1978. But that's not what fails. It's the paint below that fails. And it's never going to be the top layer. And so always look at that. And if that's the case, you can say, you know, I like this house. You know what? I'm going to run to Home Depot, and I'm going to spend $50, and I'm going to cover this with an indoor-outdoor carpeting, you know, and they're cheap. And then I'm going to put a doormat for like $5 at my front door, and I'm going to make sure everybody takes off their shoes, because if you don't take off your shoes in these old homes, your visitors will contaminate your house. So you want the shoes off, preferably outside, you know, and that's a big rule, especially in these older homes. You look at now you want to look at the yard. You're like, you know, they just painted this house. It looks great. Or they just aluminum sided it, or they put up vinyl. And the issue here is that, you know, before that it wasn't. It was wood. And, you know, they scraped it. And, you know, they didn't use drop cloth. So everything under, if you go to the house and there isn't mulch down or concrete, you know, or asphalt or some type of covering, you know that it's full of that stuff. And so now you walk through it, your pet walks through it, your kid walks through it, and it ends up in your house, you know. Yes, crawl spaces. Also, crawl spaces are exposed dirt, and in crawl spaces, what I find, Nick had a question here talking about crawl spaces. I find the issue in crawl spaces is more of a moisture and mold issue, and a lot of the crawl spaces have that white insulation, old insulation, possible asbestos, you know, on the hydronic pipes. That's always an issue. And also in crawl spaces, especially in old house, there's glass in there, you know, old medicine bottles. So, and they don't have a vapor barrier. So, so crawl space dirt is a different issue. I would say vapor barriers and a concrete mat would be the way to go on those, or be very careful. Now, you see a yard like this and you think, oh, it's okay. It is. But you can see how the grass is dying. And, you know, you want to have good grass cover, or good cover on the ground. You don't want any exposed dirt, especially, you know, if there's an old fence, like that's a new fence, but what about the old fence that used to be there? They used to scrape it, right? What about the old garage? That's not there anymore. So you always got to think about this. So the easiest thing to do is to just make sure that you've got good ground cover. obviously, you don't want to look at the house to make sure it's not an issue. I mean, if you've got aluminum sided house, you'll have to deal with like noises because it expands and contracts. Vinyl siding is good, you know. The wood is the worst because the wood peels. And a lot of times when the wood peels, what happens is that it peels not because it wants to peel there, it's because there's a moisture condition. So usually you'll have peeling paint in certain areas, it bubbles up. You go in the house and figure out there's something going on. Either you have an ice dam melting interstitially, or you've got a humidifier that's running in the basement, or you've got a crawl space. We talked about that, that's vented and wet and doesn't have a good vapor barrier, or you got a sub pump that isn't a proper cover, or you have a real big one. Nobody ever checks their dryer vents, but the dryer vents, if you got a hole the size of, you know, a finger, it's enough moisture to damage a house and cause your paint to peel. I've actually gone to houses and popped bubbles and water would come out like the house is crying. And I go in the house and it was the dryer vent. You know, every day they did a load, and now the humidity transfers through the house through vapor diffusion. And there's so many layers of paint on the outside of the house that it's a vapor barrier. And then that old paint had nail in it, and so it was elastic. It would bend and it would bubble, and there would be actually water in the bubbles. And I've done a lot of cases like that. You want to make sure in the house, you know, before you rent, you know, that you don't have any peeling paint. Now, I always tell people, be careful with the vacuum cleaners. This old trim, you know, it's got that old paint on there. So when you hit that with the vacuum cleaner because you're rushing, you're gonna cause it to break up and dust up, and then it's gonna fall into the ductwork, right? I also, you know, I always look at your ductwork too. You know, the ducts are always the dirtiest, and I've done tests in homes. I would always go to the ductwork if they said it was clean, and I would always find it in there. And you know, when the thing turns on, it blows it through the house. So, you know, dirty ducts are another problem in homes that people rent, because landlords and homeowners, they don't clean the ducts, especially when they rent or when they sell it. Now, the basement, usually if you have a moisture problem, then on the outside, you're going to have a peeling paint problem on the inside. Now, I do find when I test, I've been a inspector now for 33 years. I've had a lead certificate license for, I'm going to say 15 or 20 years, probably 22 years. And I used to even use X-ray fluorescence to do like the inspections back in the days. But you always look here and to see for peeling paint. Go outside, the gutters overflowing. A lot of this newer stuff doesn't contain lead. I've done a lot of tests, and I do find it. Now, if you find like different colors, like grays and silvers or blacks underneath all that, you know, then for sure that older stuff can contain it. Then that's a real problem, because now you're going to have continuous peeling. You're going to have efflorescence because of moisture issues. It's an issue, and even this this is a bad picture. A broom, you can't sweep it up with the broom. You're just going to aerosolize it, and then it's going to get sucked into your ductwork. Okay. So again, we talked about maybe put a mat down here, right? And maybe you call the landlord every year and say, hey, you got to take care of this stuff. And if he does take care of it, he better have a certificate that he's been to school to handle it. He better have a license, or at least use a contractor that's like EPA certified. All right, so real quick in a nutshell before I hit part two for, you know, the people that are renting, you don't look at a house at the bathrooms and towels and granite. You don't even look at that stuff. Look at the safety. And I would say that one of the biggest problems, besides other environmental issues like radon or asbestos or EMFs or chemicals, there's a lot of them. Okay, I pretty much do them all, you know, when I inspect for people with certain problems. But this is probably one of the bigger ones. And so make sure that the house, that friction areas and impact surfaces and mountable chewable areas are intact. Always think of what a 6-year-old is going to do. He's going to put his hands here. They're going to end up in his mouth. He's going to crawl over here. He's going to play over here. He's going to jump on this, and look at all that. And then for sure, look at the windows. Don't let the windows fool you. Besides, the old windows are going to cost you tons of money anyways. They're going to leak. So always look for vinyl windows and make sure they're clean. And then also go to the basement. And if there's an attic or, closets, a lot of the basement closets, those walls are always painted with that old paint, especially in them older homes in the 20s and 30s. So always look at that. All right, let's hit part two. And thanks for you guys that have been on. And later on, I'll come back and answer those questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the health history and things like that. Why do they use this stuff? Well, let's think about it. It prevented corrosion. It was resistant to mold and mildew. It was strong. It was ductile. I mean, when you painted a house with this stuff, it lasted 30, 40, 50 years, man. Today's paint, how long does today's paint last? It starts chalking after 5 years. And even when you buy that expensive, a lot of times you buy that expensive Sherwin-Williams paint. It's really good paint. But what happens is it's almost like it's almost a semi-permeable. Actually, it's almost a permeable paint. It's semi-permeable. What happens is you put paint with your house, and they claim like it's the greatest stuff in the world, and then all of a sudden your house starts bubbling. You're like, you want to, I've had a lot of cases against, and I'm going to have to say they're faulty cases because it's not Sherwin-Williams' fault. They have a great, I mean, their paint is the greatest paint, and it's ductile and all this. But the problem is they painted it over a house that had 9 other layers of paint. They had the initial paint, that had the metal in it, and then they painted it like 3, 4, or 5 times. And they put that Sherwin-Williams paint on, and then guess what? The dryer vent got loose. And after 3 weeks, the house started peeling. And all of a sudden, they want to blame it on Sherwin-Williams. Whenever you got peeling paint on the outside of your house, you got to go in your house and figure out what's the moisture source. Maybe you went and bought a ventless heater or a ventless fireplace. Maybe you got 50 plants, or you have a greenhouse in your basement, So always look for that. And one of the biggest culprits is humidifiers on furnaces. So mouthable, chewable. How's it get in your body? You chew it. Okay. This is a setup. Okay, we set this up, or you touch it with your hands. Okay, and these are child actors. They were paid very well, and you're not really allowed to use kids, but I can because I know these kids really well. I'm paying their college tuitions. The mouthable, also one of the biggest problem is people who smoke. So you got these guys. This is the greatest. I love this. You got these guys wearing white suits, right? They're cleaning out a house because, it has this paint in it. And they're doing an abatement project. And they got like plastic all over and negative air machines. And they got all kind of stuff going on. They walk out with their white suits, right? They take off their face mask. And they're not wearing gloves, right? They pull out a cigarette and smoke a cigarette, And so kind of defeats the purpose of the white suit, So people who smoke tend to get poisoned by a lot of stuff, a lot more. So mouth entry, is the biggest entry of this. They say about 1 million kids have high levels of blood in the U.S., and that kind of changes. Okay, I'm hoping that's starting to go down now. Because people are looking at this a lot more. A lot of your government subsidized rents, the inspectors are looking for this stuff. And so people like me get busy. By the way, if you do need lead clearance, I do that. I also do the assessments. I even do consultation. If you're in need of any of that. I also provide a phone service. If you just Google Clevelandmarko with a question, I could try to answer your questions, whether you're buying, selling. I've been doing this for 33 years. I got pretty much every license you can have, and I've written books and things like that. So I've been doing this for a long time, and so I do provide a consultation service. I'll put a link below for that. There's a little fee for that. It's not a lot. I don't want to tell you the fee because I might change it someday. Right now it's really low. But there is I do a lot of phone consultations for people all over the country. Well, they call me with problems. I've had people call me for the fire on how to handle the smoke and what to do. And so I do have that service. So how else does this stuff get in your body? Well, you could breathe it in. If there's, for example, if you're like, here's a good one. Your neighbor hires a painter, and this guy that's painting the house is blasting it. Okay, he's blasting it. What do you think he's doing to your property? totally contaminating it. Okay, if your windows are open, you're going to be eating your neighbor's paint. Okay, so first of all, you shouldn't be water blasting, no abrasion. And another thing you can't use is caustic chemical removal. That stuff's a whole nother problem, and you got to check your state for what your state permits. But I'm thinking the best way to do this is cover and vinyl siding. And I know some of you, oh, vinyl siding's ugly. You know what? It's the greatest stuff on this planet. It makes your house look good. It does fade and it melts, especially if your neighbor buys like low E-glass windows, and your windows are on the north side and they reflect. Paint reflect, sun reflection, melting siding is huge. But that's isolated. That's anomaly. Other than that, I think it's great. What happens is you breathe them in, they absorb in your bloodstream, and then all of a sudden they get in your digestive system. All right. And how does it harm your body? Well, it's going to harm your heart. It can harm your bloodstream. Attaches to red blood cells, especially if you don't have enough iron. So you always want to make sure you eat good. Look in the refrigerator too. If you got kids, get on the internet and find out what type of food they should be eating. There's a lot of food you could eat that pulls metals out of your body, and there's also food that you shouldn't eat, especially in homes where you're exposed to this stuff. It also can't carry a lot of oxygen. Okay, could lead to anemia, and it can also increase your risk for strokes and kidney disease and heart attacks and things like that. It So it gets pretty much trapped in your kidneys, and you know what? If you got kidney failure, well, you know what? That's a problem. So it could even lead to the end of your time. So it can get your nervous system. It disables your nerves. Okay. It can cause depression. Everybody's on medication today, because they're depressed. Maybe they need to go look at their home. I do environmental inspections all the time where people, I'm sick, I got headaches. I had one lady who would this was pretty crazy, would burp, and she goes, I don't know why I burp, And so I went to the house and I was trying to figure it out for a long time, and then she started doing it in a certain place, and sure enough, it was because she had electrical sensitivity and electromagnetic sensitivity, and she had one of those new meters on the water, and every time that thing shot a signal out to the outside, it would constrict her for some reason, and she would burp. So people, have all kind of problems. So always think about what your problem is. You're going to go to the doctor. Of course, he's going to give you the red pill or the blue pill, but you know what? Maybe it's the house. It can cause foot drop, wrist drop, shaking hands, clumsiness, dizziness, man, and the biggest thing is it can even lower your IQ. I mean, there's a lot of things that can lower your IQ, but especially with children, as as children grow up, especially under the age of 6, some of this stuff can impact them and cause a 10% IQ, diminish the IQ by 10%. So a lot of things, okay, it can cause bone tissue. This is a big one. This stuff likes to be stored in the bone. As far as can cause sickness, stress, pregnancy, especially when women are pregnant, it can, if you've got a baby or a fetus, I'm sorry, it can look for calcium and pull lead that's stored in her bones when she was a kid. So you can carry this stuff forever. It's called body burden. Okay. So, it can hurt your reproductive, decrease in fertility, premature births, miscarriages, and of course it can cause issues, with your that right there, and that right there, and that right there. It can cause effects, lower birth weights, learning problems, behavior problems. And so these are some signs: tiredness, sleeping disorders, dizziness, nervousness, depression, forgetfulness, numbness, hyperactivity, stomach aches, loss of appetite, vomiting. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these. And if you're worried about it, you need to get on the internet and research it and find out what it is, and then look at your house. Look for the environmental factor. Nobody ever looks at the environmental factor. If you cut this penny up into 2 million pieces and only ate 5 of them, that would be enough to possibly cause issues to your body. So it's not a whole lot of this stuff that can cause issues. Plus drinking, when you get up in the middle of the night, you don't want to drink water out of your faucet because, that stuff's been sitting in there. And when it sits in there, it leaches. And so you want to run the water, you want to have a filter. So, these are some of the levels. 10 is basically anything, you want to be, actually, I think they've lowered it down to 5 now, micrograms per deciliter. But, these are low levels, okay? I mean, you start getting up in here, you start getting real sick. And so this could just be dust on windows that causes, all right? In adults, it's a problem too. It's not just for kids. It can cause anemia and memory loss and clumsiness. We talked about that. And also can damage your gums, okay? And foot drops. So that's if you really, really have a lot of it. So anything built prior to 1948, you want to look at. Anything past 1978, 78, probably 1980 is probably okay, all right? So we're going to do this real quick because I think my phone only has like 6% left. So there's different types. You got the screen. Nobody does that. Inspection, that's an x-ray gun, surface by surface. Not a whole lot of people do that. Risk assessment, yes, they do that in a clearance test. And then nobody does that either, okay? So basically, when you do a lead inspection, it's a surface by surface. So the guy would come in with an x-ray gun, Cobalt 57, and do every surface. And then even if it's not a mouthable, chewable, or impact surface, they still tell you what it is. And I'm not, in a lead assessment, I'm not too worried about that. Assessment, I'm looking at for where I can see a problem could exist. Some peeling paint, or there's friction, or there's a potential of dust being generated. Okay, lead testing, nobody does that. That's very rare. That's mostly for contractors. So here's an example of a risk assessment. Went to this house. It was built in the 40s. We knew it had lead. Okay, and so we did a visual assessment of the paint condition. And then what we did was we collected peeling paint because we knew it was bad. So we got some peeling paint here. There's exposed dirt. Look, exposed dirt, paint chips. We took a sample, peeling paint. So in the living room, so we went everywhere where there's anything over 10% damage, we would take a sample. Remember that dust picture I showed you? Yeah, we did a 12 by 12 dust sample. It's called a wipe test. And that's a wipe test also underneath the window. And a wipe test, usually I do 13 tests as a minimum per house on the inside, 3 tests on the outside. Okay, and so these are wipe tests that we did, and we sent them to a lab. Okay, and you can see how dusty that is. That could be from the neighbors. You open the windows, and I do the windowsills. I use templates. These are 2 by 18, 36 square inches. So I do 12 square to 144 square inches for floors and windows and troughs. I use these smaller ones, and we send them to a lab. And I tell them, hey, look, you got a water problem. There's infrared. Hey, the window's leaking. It's causing this peeling paint. Fix that. So we get this, and yes, look at this. From the results were high. Okay, the floors you only have 40. Yes, it was high. So these are the tests that came back. Yes, yes, yes. So there was a lot, not a lot. These are low levels, but 40 for floors is the maximum. So we basically said, hey, you got to clean the place up. You got to sterilize it, use a HEPA vacuum, and you want to use, HEPA, and you want to use phosphate. People use like a phosphate solution, okay? And the soil was also was okay. You're allowed 400. There was some there. We got lucky in some of the paint that was on the outside, but we still said, hey, cover it because it wasn't a homogeneous test. And the garage, those other tests, and they were all good. Okay, so you really don't know, if it is or not without really testing it. We tell you to assume that it is. So any disturbed peeling, friction, surface, lead to dust, just assume it, especially if it's pre-1978. If you want to test it, go for it. The only problem is once you test the paint, then you got to disclose it, right? But if you test the dust, then you can clean the dust, do the clearance test. You don't have to do it, right? So I would rather do dust testing than paint chip. 40 is very low, okay, for floors. 250 is the windowsills. So they have different values, okay, window troughs. And then the soils, you've got 400 players and 1,200 non-players. So, so then they cleaned it up. We checked it out, and here's, look at this. They did a nice job. They cleaned, they removed the dirt, they put down the mulch. They spray painted the walls, they fixed the leak. Okay, they cleaned the windows, they cleaned the dust, they cleaned the ducts, they repainted all the peeling paint that I showed you earlier. They got rid of the brush, they cleaned the gutters, they made sure, there wasn't going to be any leaks, okay, oh, yeah, here you can see where the gutters were overflowing, okay, they took care of that. We did a test, and guess what? Everything was good, no further work. all the tests we did. What these are called wipe tests. Okay, and we would do 13 of them, and they all passed. And so the case study, we'll make it real quick. The case study, basically, the kid's poison. We go to the house and we check the floors; they're clean. We check the house entrances; they're clean. There's no peeling paint. The windows are painted. No peeling paint in the driveways. Okay, and so everything passed. How's the kid getting poisoned? Well, it's a daycare. They went to the YMCA with the kid. They went to school. Oh, they went to grandma's. Ah, there's grandma's house. So you can be poisoned going to other places, other people's homes. All right. So this is the end of this of my presentation tonight. I want to thank you all for coming on. I will answer your questions as soon as I get off. So I kind of had to speed it up. I was dying on power. Thank you.